So, people don't like the Star Wars sequels. Or, more specifically, the people who don't like the Star Wars sequels really do not like them.
Your hate has made you powerful.
But what if I were to tell you that there are parts that are actually good?
Every word of what you just said was wrong.
I know, it sounds crazy, but stick with me. Today, I want to talk about Kylo Ren, and more specifically, about the two times where he interacts with his father, Han Solo, because when you put these two scenes in conversation with one another, they wind up being some of my favorite moments in the whole franchise. First of all, let's explore a little bit of Kylo's backstory, because the sequels really do a bad job explaining what happened between episodes 6 and 7. Basically, Ben was force sensitive from an early age, and prone to powerful outbursts.
So you don't have to look at it anymore!
After overhearing his parents express concern for his lack of control, a part of Ben believed his parents viewed him as a problem to be dealt with rather than a beloved son. During these early years, Snoke/Darth Sidious began reaching out to Ben telepathically, gently nudging him towards darkness whenever the opportunity arose. At this point, no one but Luke and Leia knew that Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader were the same person, so Ben had no context with which to frame his dark urges. From his point of view, he was the only one struggling between light and darkness. He viewed his parents and uncle as paragons of the light side and was too ashamed to open up to them regarding his conflict. The emotional isolation became even more distinct after Ben began training to become a Jedi. The physical distance made it impossible for Han and Leia to give him the guidance he needed, and Snoke's manipulation caused Ben to doubt Luke as a mentor. When rivals of Leia revealed that she was the daughter of Vader, Ben felt completely betrayed. How could he trust his family when they kept such a key part of his lineage a secret? Were they afraid because he too possessed a growing darkness? Or were they just jealous of his power? Of his potential? Capitalizing on this doubt, Snoke made Ben believe that his family and the Jedi were his enemies. He promised Ben acceptance and celebration, rather than the rejection that Ben felt within Luke's Jedi Order. It's essentially the same playbook that he used to corrupt Anakin during the Clone Wars. Luke had been aware of this growing darkness within Ben, and when he had a premonition about all the harm his nephew would cause, he ignited his lightsaber instinctively. I know this moment is controversial, because people say, why would Luke even think about killing his nephew when he never once doubted that Vader was worthy of redemption? And I understand why people feel this way. But for one thing, Luke definitely had moments of doubt.
Then my father is truly dead.
And he's known to resort to violence when people he cares about are being threatened.
If you will not turn to the dark side, then perhaps she will.
If we're being realistic, Luke probably has PTSD, so I can forgive the guy for having a split-second lapse in judgment. But unfortunately, Ben didn't understand the complexity of the situation. From his point of view, a family member and mentor was going to slice him in half with a laser sword. To think a Jedi capable of such an act fundamentally changes Ben's worldview. The people who claimed to be righteous were willing to harm and deceive him. The people he was told were evil were the only ones seemingly wanted to protect him. And this is why Ben becomes Kylo Ren. Everything he thought he knew now seems to be a lie. So in the same way he has to reconstruct his worldview, he also reconstructs his identity. He models his persona around who he thinks Darth Vader was: enigmatic, powerful, and no emotional ties to anyone or anything. Thus, Kylo Ren is born and Ben Solo is gone forever. Or is he? Which brings us to episode 7. As we all know, Star Wars is about two things above all else: daddy problems and problematic daddies, which is why Han Solo and Kylo Ren's relationship is so compelling. When we first hear Han discuss the Kylo situation with Leia, it seems like Han has completely given up on their son.
We lost our son. Forever.
But what I think is actually happening here is that Han has given up on himself. Han is famously not good at talking about his feelings.
I love you.
I know.
But if you read between the lines, he's one of the most complex characters in the movie. It's heavily implied that Han and Leia's relationship fell apart due to the trauma of losing their son, and I think Han personally shoulders a lot of the blame. Han grows a lot in the original trilogy, starting out as a scoundrel, becoming a reluctant hero, and learning to accept the vulnerability that comes with caring about people other than yourself. But even still, becoming a father is a huge change, and it's reasonable to assume that Han had his fair share of doubts. Would he be a good parent? Should he let his child live a normal life like him? Or should he encourage them to embrace the Skywalker legacy? So, when Ben turned evil, breaking Leia's heart, and destroying everything Luke was trying to build, Han probably felt like he personally let down every important person in his life. He views his very existence as a monument to the tragedy of Ben Solo.
I know every time you look at me, you're reminded of him.
But this is why I think he's given up on himself rather than his son. He still has hope that Ben Solo lives on, but he doesn't think he has what it takes to save their son. The emergence of Kylo Ren fundamentally changed Han's view of himself. He suddenly doubted the man he had spent so long becoming, and reverted back to viewing himself as a scoundrel. This is why when Han asks,
If Luke couldn't reach him, how could I?
Leia's response is so important.
Luke is a Jedi. You're his father.
By reminding him that nothing can ever change that part of who he is, Leia reinstills Han with confidence. If he is still Ben's father, then Kylo is still Han's son, which means Han just might be able to get through to him. And that brings us to their first confrontation. On Starkiller Base, while setting up explosives, Han narrowly evades being discovered by Kylo. In this moment, he could revert to being the old Han, the one that leaves people behind in order to save his own skin. Or he could be a Resistance hero, taking out Kylo Ren by surprise with a well-placed blaster shot. But instead, Han Solo chooses to be a father and reach out to his son.
Ben!
From the very beginning of the conversation, it's clear that Han and Kylo are coming at things from a very different place. Han uses his son's first name to emphasize their connection, to remind Kylo of who he used to be. Kylo, on the other hand, uses Han's first name to distance himself, to frame his father as an opponent rather than family.
Han Solo. I've been waiting for this day for a long time.
It's a simple but elegant use of dialogue to convey character. From here, Han focuses on trying to deconstruct the persona of Kylo Ren.
Take off that mask. You don't need it.
Han is no stranger to a protective persona. He knows that Kylo Ren is just a shield. The constant conflict between light and dark is too much for Ben,
I'm being torn apart. I want to be free of this pain.
and the Vader-esque persona he's crafted for himself is a way of denying who he really is. Which is why it's so important to Han that his son takes off the mask both literally and figuratively. Kylo's next line of dialogue is probably my favorite in the whole movie.
Your son, he's gone. He was weak and foolish like his father, so I destroyed him.
First of all, it's very similar to this line from Kenobi.
You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker. I did.
Which retroactively is another way in which Kylo imitates Vader. Secondly, it emphasizes how much Kylo is trying to be a bad person.
I feel it again. The pull to the light.
Darkness might come naturally to him, but evil does not. And therefore, it takes constant effort to suppress the side of him that he considers to be Ben Solo. Now, Han's response to this is definitely correct.
That's what Snoke wants you to believe, but it's not true. My son is alive.
But it's also what dooms him to his ultimate fate. Trying to make Kylo distrust Snoke was never going to work because Snoke had already made Kylo distrust his father. Kylo naturally is going to view any attempt to discredit Snoke as misinformation, especially after Han, Leia, and Luke hid the truth from him for so long. There is a brief moment where it seems like Kylo wants to believe his father, but as he put it,
It's too late.
even before he started his Jedi training, there was a part of Ben that felt like the darkness had already consumed him and that he was too far gone to return to the light. Throughout the sequel trilogy, there are multiple moments that seem like he wants to change, but ultimately decides that it would be too little too late. Even when Han tells him,
No, it's not. Leave here with me. Come home. We miss you.
Kylo doesn't believe him. Part of him wants so badly to believe that it's true, but the fear within him won't allow him to risk being wrong, which leads him to ask for his father's help one last time.
I know what I have to do, but I don't know if I have the strength to do it. Will you help me?
Now, the double meaning of this request is such a beautiful bit of tragic writing. Han believes that his son Ben is asking for help to turn his back on the dark side, for his father to embrace him and welcome him back to the light. But Kylo is asking for Han to sacrifice himself. As his parent, Han is one of the only ties to who Kylo used to be. As long as Han lives, so does Ben Solo. Ironically, the fact that Kylo needs his father's permission to carry out this wicked deed proves that Ben is still in there somewhere. Which is why when Kylo asks Han for help, Han says,
Yes, anything.
and actually means it. Even though Han initially thinks Kylo is surrendering his lightsaber to him, he's not all that surprised when the truth is revealed. As Kylo starts to turn the blade towards his father's chest, Han doesn't seem to resist. But I don't think it's because he's given up hope. In fact, it's quite the opposite. After Kylo ignites his blade, Han's expression is one of sadness, but not surprise. He touches his son's face gently, almost as if to say, "It's alright, I forgive you." It reminds me a lot of when Zuko finally reunites with Uncle Iroh.
I was never angry with you. I was sad because I was afraid you lost your way.
Han believes with every fiber of his being that his son Ben is still in there. He's just sad that he won't be alive to see him come home. As difficult as it is to accept, it's not too late for Kylo, it's just too early for Ben. Speaking of things that are hard to accept, did you know that there are companies that make money off of collecting and selling your personal data without your consent? They're called data brokers, and websites like these are basically your worst enemy when it comes to your online privacy. But because of today's sponsor, Delete Me, you can start regaining control over your digital footprint. Delete Me works tirelessly behind the scenes to figure out which data brokers have your information and request that it be removed on your behalf. Just last year, I was being targeted by a number of spam calls and phishing scams, all because some data broker had gotten a hold of my information. If I had had Delete Me back then, I would have known the cause much sooner and have been able to solve the problem much faster. Now though, I use Delete Me's privacy reports to help me prevent something like that from happening again. As you can see, they present you with all the information you need in an easy to understand format, and if the report shows that someone has your information, you're just a few clicks away from sending a takedown request. It's scary not knowing who might have your personal information, but Delete Me will remove your data from hundreds of data brokers and help you regain some of your personal privacy online. Get 20% off Delete Me US consumer plans when you go to joindeleteme.com/block and use code BLOCK for 20% off. So in The Last Jedi, one of Kylo's big lines is,
Let the past die. Kill it, if you have to.
but the problem is, he isn't actually able to do that. He doesn't kill Leia when he has the chance, and Leia's death is actually the thing that shakes him out of his persona. In Rise of Skywalker, when Kylo is fighting Rey, Leia reaches out to him with the Force,
Ben.
distracting him just enough so that Rey can stab him with his own lightsaber. But unfortunately, Leia becomes one with the Force in the process. Suddenly, Kylo gets what he wanted all along. Han, Leia, and Luke are all dead. Everyone who knew him as Ben Solo is gone. And yet, as Luke once put it,
No one's ever really gone.
standing alone on the ruins of the Death Star, Ben is visited by the memory of his father. And the conversation that follows is a direct inversion of the last time the two men spoke.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Now, the first big difference is how Han addresses Ben.
Hey, kid.
Rather than calling him by his name and pressuring him to assume his old identity, Han instead uses terms that signal their relationship to one another.
I miss you, son.
It's as if to say, whoever you are and whatever name you use, I am still your father. When he tries to argue and says,
Your son is dead.
Han corrects him and says,
Kylo Ren is dead. My son is alive.
I think this really points out what Kylo Ren actually was. It was a manifestation of the troubled relationship between a child and his family. It was a scared little boy's attempt at running from the hurt that comes with disappointing the people you love. But when the last member of his family gladly makes the ultimate sacrifice reaching out to him, he finally realizes that nothing he could ever do would change the fact that these people love him. It's like when Leia says,
You think I want to forget him? I want him back.
Young Ben Solo thought that his family resented him for the darkness he felt inside of himself, but in actuality, they just feared that the darkness would drive a wedge between them and their son. They were worried about him, but never once did their love for Ben falter. Ben was scared that his darkness made him unlovable, so he constructed an identity that didn't need love. He tried to sever the connection between him and the people he cared about, but real love is a connection that can never be broken.
That's just love. Nothing you can do about that.
Even when Ben tries to dismiss his father,
You're just a memory.
Han says,
Your memory.
pointing out that this side of Ben was never really gone, just suppressed. When he's once again afraid that it's too late to set things right, especially since Leia is already dead, Han explains,
Your mother's gone. But what she stood for, what she fought for, that's not gone.
Now, in the literal sense, this might be referring to the rebellion, but in the broader sense, I think what Leia was standing for was hope. The thing she hoped for more than anything was that her son would one day return. This bit of dialogue is so important because it reminds Ben that he can be good regardless of whether his loved ones are alive or not. The good that his family saw in him persists even now. Even if he can't return home, he can return to the light, which is also why this is the point where Han finally calls his son
Ben.
He had to wait for Ben to remember who he was on his own, for him to willingly drop the persona of Kylo Ren and become the Jedi he was always meant to be. Now, a lot of people view this scene as a redemption for the character, but I think that's a bit of a misinterpretation. A character like Zuko from The Last Airbender has a real redemption arc where he slowly does enough good to balance out the bad in his ledger. Kylo/Ben, on the other hand, decides to do one good deed after a lifetime of evil, but I kind of think that this makes it way more powerful.
I know what I have to do, but I don't know if I have the strength to do it.
See, what this says to me is that Ben Solo knows that he is beyond redemption. He has done far too many wicked deeds to balance out his ledger in the short amount of time he has left, which makes doing the right thing sort of terrifying on an existential level. Not only does Ben need to sacrifice himself to save Rey, but he has to do so knowing that history will still brand him a villain. For all the character growth he goes through, the galaxy will still remember him as Kylo Ren, and this is why he doesn't know if he has the strength to do it. Living in your essence and breaking free of your persona is tough enough on its own. Doing so while knowing that that persona lives on without you feels kind of pointless, at least from an individual perspective. So when Kylo decides to become Ben Solo once more, he's doing so not for the good of himself, but rather for the good of countless people who will never know his name. And while that one act doesn't redeem him, it certainly does speak to the strength of his character. Now, the last words they say to each other are obviously a parallel to Han and Leia.
Dad. I know.
But in my opinion, they are way more powerful in Rise of Skywalker. Ben has so many things he wishes he could say to his father. Not just, I love you, but I'm sorry. I miss you. I miss Mom. You were right. And countless other sentiments that he'll never get to share. And for anyone who's lost a person you care about, you know what that feels like. It might be things that were left unsaid, or things you didn't even know you wanted to talk about until they were gone. But more than getting it off your own chest, you just really hope they knew what you felt and would have said if you had more time with them. So for Ben Solo to get that moment with his father, well, that's some damn good writing. I'm Dylan, and this has been The Writer's Block.